Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your custom source material and turn complexity into clarity. Today, we are putting on our localization goggles and plunging into a subject that I think reveals this astonishing complexity that lurks just beneath the shared culture. We're talking about localizing accounting software for the vast, globally dispersed world of Portuguese-speaking countries.
It's a really remarkable challenge. I mean, when we talk about the Lusophone world, we're talking about the CPLP, the Community of Portuguese Language Countries. That's over 280 million speakers across 4 continents. And the source material you shared, well, it makes one thing completely clear. This challenge goes so much further than just translating a simple word list.
Right, so our mission today is to cut through that super specialized technical documentation and just pull out the most surprising nuggets of knowledge for you. Because what we found is, while the language is shared, the language of money, the financial lexicon, is wildly different.
That's it. It really all hinges on this core distinction between European Portuguese, PTTTT, and the radically divergent Brazilian Portuguese, PTBR, especially when you get into tax and accounting.
So it's two separate financial worlds.
Almost entirely. And if a software company just assumes they can use a single Portuguese language file and deploy it everywhere, well, they're heading for complete failure in legal compliance and in user adoption.
Okay, let's start with the big picture then. Let's unpack this Lusophone accounting map. So Portuguese is the official language for financial reporting in several countries. And we know that globally there's this big push towards IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards, but our sources confirm that, beneath that global goal, local standards are still what dominate.
That's the key tension right there. Developers can't just rely on IFRS. The sources highlight 3 really distinct and mandatory pillars of compliance that the software has to navigate at the same time.
Okay, so give us the first pillar. Where do we start?
We start with Portugal, PTPT. Their standard is the SNC, the Sistema de Normalização Contabilística. This is basically IFRS, but it's IFRS as adopted and interpreted through the lens of the European Union. So it's the foundation for the PTPT language files, but it's just one piece of this puzzle.
Simple enough on the European side. Now, if we jump the Atlantic to the biggest member of the CPLP.
We hit the second pillar, Brazil, PTBR. Brazil uses the CPC, which is the Comitê de Pronunciamentos Contábeis. Now, what's fascinating here is that Brazilian JAP, their accounting principles, are now essentially fully converged with IFRS.
Oh, okay. So they should be pretty similar then.
You'd think so, but the regulatory bodies insisted on keeping their own distinct, very complex terminology and, crucially, their own national reporting requirements, especially for taxes.
So same principles, but entirely different language and compliance steps. That sounds like a monumental task already.
It is. But we've still got a third major pillar, and this is where things get even more complicated. The African CPLP members.
Right, the sources mention nations like Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea. They fall under a completely different regional framework.
Exactly. They follow the OHADA system, or SASCOHADA. This is a regional standard designed to harmonize business law across multiple African nations, and not just the Lusophone ones. The source material explicitly states that compliance corrections are required just to make the software compatible with OHADA's structure.
Can you give us a concrete example of that? Like, why does OHADA force a unique software configuration that's different from both Portugal and Brazil?
Sure. OHADA mandates a very standardized, very structured approach to financial reporting. The whole point is to encourage regional investment and clarity. So, one key difference is a chart of accounts. It has to strictly adhere to the SASCOHADA numerical structure, and it also requires really specific formats for annual reports and disclosures, which often need longer narrative fields, different data groupings. You just can't default to the PT setup. You have to build for OHADA.
So the standards are the framework, but then you've got these immediate sort of foundational things that can trip anyone up. Let's talk about the chart of accounts, the plano de contas.
This is more of a technical check than a linguistic one. Most Lusophone countries use a standardized numbered chart. For instance, Class 1 is always liquid assets, Class 2 is fixed assets, and so on. The software has to not only translate the labels, but critically, it has to make sure the structure and the numeric codes match the national plan. If the codes are wrong, the system is useless for an audit.
Okay, here's the part that I think is really interesting for anyone configuring international software. The number formats. We're dealing with the euro in Portugal and the real in Brazil, but both countries, and this is the key detail, use a comma for decimals.
Yes, and a period for thousands. This is probably the single most common and potentially catastrophic error you can make in an initial software setup.
So an engineer working from, say, an American standard would type 1000.50, meaning $1,000.50.
Exactly. But the Lusophone software, set to the standard format, will read that as 1.000050.
Wait, hold on. So if I'm an engineer anywhere else in the world, I'm instinctively going to set that up completely backward.
Absolutely. When the software sees 1.00050, it interprets that as one single unit and 1,050 cents. The entire magnitude is wrong. It's a critical, non-linguistic setting. You have to get that comma period swap right.
And the tax complexity isn't just at the national level. You pointed out some surprising geographical nuances, even just inside Portugal.
Yeah, the source material shows that while the Portuguese mainland has a 23% standard VAT rate, the autonomous region of Madeira is at 22%, and then the Azores drop all the way down to 16%. So the localization file has to support these regional tax variants, not just a single national standard. You need geo-specific tax tables.
That is just immense complexity. Let's move on and talk about this terminology fault line between Portugal and Brazil. The simple word for VAT, value-added tax, seems to highlight the problem perfectly.
It's where any translation effort just grinds to a halt. In Portugal, Guinea-Bissau, and other CPLP nations, the tax is called IVA Imposto sobre o Valor Acrescentado. It's straightforward.
But Brazil is the outlier.
Completely. Historically, Brazil doesn't even use the term IVA in its accounting software. They use the much broader term impostos, which just means taxes. Or they use a whole stack of specific acronyms like ICMS, IPI, PIS, COFINS. So if a Brazilian user opens up software and sees IVA report everywhere, the whole interface just feels wrong. It feels foreign and probably non-compliant.
And this is the part that was my aha moment from the documents. This regulatory difference is actually deepening right now. There's a historic tax transition happening in Brazil.
You can't overstate how big this is. The sources say that as of January 1st, 2026, Brazil is officially in its test phase for a brand new dual VAT system, and that requires a seismic shift in how invoices are generated.
What does the software actually have to change to handle that?
Well, it demands new data fields. Invoices now have to display two new federal taxes, the CBS at 0.9% and the IBS at 0.1%. Now, these are being offset against legacy taxes for now, but the accounting software has to immediately include these new type fields and calculation logic. It's a massive technical hurdle driven entirely by legal reform.
So if we just zoom out for a second, we've basically established that a developer cannot share a single line of foundational code, not the currency format, not the VAT terms, between Lisbon and Sao Paulo. And this divergence goes even deeper into core accounting vocabulary.
Oh, it does. Just look at the names for core legal documents. A tax invoice in PT is a fatura. In PTBR, it's a nota fiscal, or NFE.
A tax ID.
Portugal uses NEF or NIPC. Brazil requires a CNPJ for companies and a CPF for individuals. They're totally different numbering schemes, different validation rules.
And even basic accounting terms. Retained earnings in Portugal is resultados transitados.
And in Brazil, it's lucros acumulados. Even a simple action like grouping journal entries changes. In Portugal, it's a diario, a journal. But in Brazil, it's a lute, a batch.
These aren't just synonyms, are they? They reflect different processes.
Exactly. And the problem even spills into basic software UI terms. It highlights a kind of subtle technology gap between the two markets.
Give me an example of that.
So Portugal often defaults to classic terms like utilizador for user and ecrã for screen. Brazil, on the other hand, prefers the more internationally common usuário and tela. Now, a Brazilian can probably figure out what ecrã means, but seeing it immediately dates the software. It signals that it was adapted from a European source, not a global one.
I want to stop on this because this was the most surprising detail for me. It's not just about finding the right word for save, it's about the entire tone of the command. Can you explain the difference between infinitivo and imperativo?
It's a critical cultural and grammatical distinction. In user interfaces, Portugal generally prefers the infinitivo for instructions, something like guardar dados, which literally means to save data. It's a softer, less direct instruction.
Right, whereas Brazil is more direct.
Exactly. Brazil prefers the imperativo. Salves dados, save the data. It's a command. That's the expectation in Brazilian UI. So if a user in São Paulo sees the PT style, they might just feel the software is poorly written or, not really made for them.
So you have to review every single menu item, not just patch it.
Every single one.
Moving into our third segment, let's look at the actual mechanics of how you support this. Because if the regulations are this different, you must need a really flexible foundation.
You absolutely do. The documentation talks about these customized empty books templates. What's crucial to understand is that these are pre-configured Firebird database templates.
And for anyone who's not familiar, why does the fact that it's a Firebird database matter here?
It matters because Firebird allows for these highly structured, embedded templates. They're shipped to the user containing only the three most essential control accounts: debtors control, creditors control, and retained earnings. That's it. So by shipping this blank but structurally sound template, you're giving the user a clean, compliant backend that's ready for their specific chart of accounts.
So it's a clean slate. It's free of any irrelevant default data that might conflict with local standards, whether that's SNC, CPC, or OHEDA.
It's key. It ensures the software is compliant from day one, and it lets the user input their legally mandated numeric chart of accounts without having to delete hundreds of incorrect default lines first.
And speaking of structural fixes, there was a major technical upgrade detailed in the sources that connects directly to this, the fix for the dynamic SQL error Nastra 303 bug.
This is a textbook case of global financial law driving technical development. The bug was happening because a key field in a backend table was simply too small. The fix involved extending the field length in a table called BAT types.
What's the BAT types table for?
It holds definitions for things like batch types, transaction types, and messages, all the descriptive info attached to financial entries. It was restricted to only 16 characters. The fix extended it all the way up to 128 characters.
So what's the so what here? What does expanding a database field to 128 characters actually achieve for the end user?
It achieves compliance, plain and simple. Frameworks like IFRS and OHEDA often require much longer, more detailed descriptions and narratives for accounts and transactions than older systems ever allowed for. By extending that field length, the software can now hold all the detailed data and audit trail information required by these big international frameworks. A technical fix solved a regulatory problem.
That is a phenomenal connection. Okay, finally, let's go back to the African localization strategy. For places like Guinea-Bissau, they rely on the PTPT linguistic base, but the UI still needs some optimization.
Yes, because they need speed and clarity. The sources showed they applied some really sophisticated linguistic rules to make the UI more consistent, mostly just to make the text easier to scan. For instance, they replaced long noun phrases like listigem de documentos, which is listing of documents, with a much more direct verb action: listar documentos, list documents.
And they use that space-saving strategy of dropping prepositions.
Exactly. They removed connecting words like de, do, or da. It makes the text much cleaner and saves valuable space, maybe on older or smaller screens. So instead of controlo de accesso, control of access, they just use this snappier controlo accesso.
It's a subtle but really effective UI trick.
It is.
And every single localization file kind of acts as its own compliance warning, right?
Yeah.
You noted that special label 100,000 in every language file, which states the country, and ISO code PTPT, PTBR, and then explicitly says to customize this language file, create a copy. That's basically the developers waving a giant flag saying, here's the base, but you must localize this further.
So our deep dive into this technical documentation really confirms that the unified Portuguese language across the CPLP just masks this profound technical, legal, and cultural divergence in how money is handled. Localization here demands highly customized solutions, a whole regulatory overhaul for Brazil, technical compliance for Africa. It's not about simple dictionary swaps.
It's been a fascinating journey through accounting codes, tax IDs, and Portuguese grammar. But here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. We just saw how a very specific technical decision to fix a SQL error, extending a database field from 16 to 128 characters, was directly mandated by the need to comply with global standards like IFRS and OHADA. The law dictates the code, not the other way around.
Now, just consider the sheer complexity of maintaining global financial software. If the simple act of translating invoice and defining the grammar for save requires a complete legal and grammatical overhaul across the Lusophone world, which is united by one language family, imagine the staggering scope of the problem when software localization has to tackle completely separate language families. I mean, think about the gulf between, say, Arabic and Japanese accounting principles, or between Russian and Mandarin compliance rules. The need for this kind of specialized technical flexibility is constantly forcing developers to play catch-up with the law in every single market.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.